very happy Mosaic experience. So today is the third day of Mosaic, JNUTA JNU, and this affirmative event of joyful solidarity, empathy, and coming together. This is also the third Adda in this event, and over the past 2 days we had vibrant exchanges of ideas. We began on the 9th in the evening with feminist perspectives on home, work, and law. And yesterday, we revisited the founding principles and aspirations behind JNU's ethos. Today, we should look more closely at the efforts made over time to shape JNU as an inclusive space of excellence. How far has these efforts been successful in addressing issues of access and social justice? And what more remains to be done, and for us to think critically, which I think has been the, what is the underlying connection between the three talks. And we have an excellent panel today who will discuss these questions, these very important issues, the problems we face and how they can, move towards some sort of, maybe further discussions and even resolving some of the issues. So I'm delighted to invite Joy Pachuau. She's my colleague in the ex-com in the JNUTA. She will be moderating the panel today. Joy is a professor at the Center for Historical Studies, a holder of 2 doctorates in history and social anthropology. Joy's works span the social history of Mizoram and Northeast India, the history of Christianity in India, and environmental and multi-species histories. Her most recent book, co-authored with William Van Schendel, entitled Entangled Lives, Human, Animal, Plant History of Eastern Himalayas Triangle, was published by Cambridge University Press in November 2022. So over to you, Joy. And for everybody, we would also like to know if the original idea and the impulse for holding Mosaic actually came from Joy.
I'll begin by standing here first and then we'll move over. But maybe we can ask Professor Sachidanand and Dr. Harish also to come on stage. On the first day of the Adda, I think Aisha handled the session really well. It was extremely informal, and I don't think I can replicate that, but I hope the mood is the same. So we will try and make it as informal, but of course hope to have a very intensive discussion because we have experts in the area, and I'm sure that all of us are interested in this topic of access and justice in education here in JNU. So I want to begin by welcoming all of you to the third day of the JNUTA Festival Mosaic, JNUTA JNU. And I think all of you will agree that it has been a roaring success. And on behalf of the TA, I would also once again want to thank you all for making it such a big success. And we have had some brilliant sessions, and we had the opportunity to hear and interact with some of the most illustrious teachers and academics that the JNU community has been fortunate to have, both in the past and in the present. And today too, we have a panel of experts who are no less exceptional in their respective fields, who will talk about an important hallmark of JNU, which has been its experiments to make education accessible to all sections of society. At the Adda yesterday, we heard that JNU was envisioned to be a special kind of university. As an aside, I would also encourage all of you to go through the pages of a very interesting book that came out a few years ago that was edited by my colleagues at CHS called JNU Stories, the first 50 years, to understand the edifice on which this university has been built and to take pride in its heritage as well as to be contributors to that heritage. It is truly enlightening to know the dreams on which this university was built, some of the experiments that were carried out, and the cutting-edge research and academic innovations and practices this university has been able to bring about. So for those of you who are new, please do get hold of the book and read it. You don't have to buy it. E-versions of it abound, and we in JNU know which sites we are referring to. I just want to hark back to one point that was mentioned yesterday that is pertinent for our discussion today. As we heard, there were discussions for 2 days in Parliament in December 1965. I must also remind you that this was after Nehru's death, because Nehru was clear nothing must be named after a living person. He was clear he did not want a university in his name. So there were 2 days of discussion in the Parliament in 1965 regarding the setting up of this university. And it was clear from the very start that the university had to be of an entirely new type. These were the words that were used. And the new institution, it was felt, had to represent the principles that infused Nehru's life, which were secularism and cosmopolitanism, social justice and scientific temper, as well as his interest in international affairs and his commitment to world peace. So the discussions in Parliament veered on how this institution of an entirely new type was to be conceived. The elements that came to define this uniqueness through discussion in Parliament came to be identified as: 1, the idea of criticality through dialogue and debate, these were mentioned yesterday; secularism, inclusivity, interdisciplinarity, autonomy, and finally love and trust. Most of these points were mentioned yesterday, but today we will be focusing more on the idea of inclusivity. So from the very beginning, this idea of inclusive academy of higher research in terms of social, the idea of an exclusive academy of higher research in terms of social composition, that is an exclusive academy, this was abandoned, and the university was not meant to be a provincial one. It was to actively engage in bringing in students, exceptional students, that is, from all over the country, that encompassed the diversity that was India. So let me briefly quote from JNU's stories. The first schedule of the bill stated that the university had to take special measures to facilitate students and teachers from all over India to join the university and participate in its academic programs. Meeting fellow students from different parts of India would itself be a learning experience, an encounter that would help students understand the meaning of cultural diversity and create the basis of a truly composite culture. The university, moreover, could not become the preserve of the rich. While aspiring for excellence, it had to be committed to social justice. Close quote. So inclusivity being one of the main elements of JNU's founding principles or vision, we have 3 extremely qualified members of the faculty to discuss how JNU has fared on this principle of inclusivity. Of course, Sachi has just recently retired, but once a JNUite, always a JNUite. So we are very happy to have 3 members of 3 panel members. Unfortunately, one of them, Professor Sonajharia Minz, is going to join us late. She should be here in about another half an hour or so. And so when she arrives, she will join us in the discussion. But I guess I will introduce all 3 panels and then ask them to give their comments on some questions that we have sort of thought about. So Professor Sachidanand Sinha retired from JNU after serving the university for 34 years as a highly sought-after teacher and playing a vital role in shaping the university's academic orientation and social composition. A social geographer, keenly invested in issues of education, Professor Sinha's research and teaching has spanned issues of health, educational development, and development concerns for the socially and economically marginalized communities. He played a crucial role in developing and implementing the deprivation point system that has been central to JNU's distinctive response to questions of access and justice in the field of public higher education. It is also great to welcome Sachi to this event organized by the TA, which she has led as president and has participated actively over decades. The next member is Professor Sonajharia Minz, who is currently the Vice Chancellor of Sodo Kanu Murmu University, Dunka. Sona has been a faculty member of JNU for the past 30 years and is currently professor at the School of Computer and Systems Sciences. Her research has engaged with geospatial informatics, spatio-temporal data analysis, data mining, and machine learning. Sona is a vocal and effective supporter of social justice and Dalit and Adivasi rights, and has been very responsive to issues posed by access to education to forging egalitarian futures. The third member is Dr. Harish Wankhede, who also really needs no introduction. He teaches at the Center for Political Studies here in JNU, and his areas of teaching and research are political theory, public institutions, secularism, and social justice, as well as cinema. He has contributed extensively on reading culture through Ambedkarite lens in journals and academic forums. And just to mention a few of them, they include Understanding the Dalits, Critique of Anna Hazare Movement, Secular State in India, a Modernist Dalit Perspective, etc., etc. The list is long. So in 2013-14, Dr. Wankhede was awarded the Raman Fellowship for postdoctoral research at the Stanford University, and where he collaborated with the Center for South Asia in consultation with Professor Blom for the postdoctoral project. I think being a public intellectual, I know that many of you are followers of what he writes in newspapers and other social media platforms. So I have introduced the three speakers, and I just want to start off by sort of laying out a few ideas, and I would ask the speakers to give their comments on that. And the first issue I would like to broach with the panelists is regarding the affirmative action that JNU has followed, and its history and functioning. Has it been satisfactory? Is there any quantitative data to show the inclusivity? What is the current system that is being followed? What more can be done with regard to affirmative action in India, whereas JNU failed with regard to affirmative action? So those are some of the broad questions that I would like them to talk about in the first instance, and then perhaps we can go to other rounds as well. So maybe Professor Sachidanand should start, and then I'll ask Harish, please.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you, JNUTA, for giving me this opportunity to reconnect myself with जुड़ते जुड़ते. मैं तो ये सोच रहा था कि मैं टूटता हुए कहीं पे कर रहा हूँ, जब से JNU छोड़ा है. About the deprivation points and the question of access. But we got to really understand that in spite of the very elaborate discussion in the parliament and the way this university was set up in '69, some of the objectives or the principles, founding principles, were not very easy to be implemented. But at the same time, we got to also look at the scenario which was obtaining in the country at that particular point of time. particularly in the North India. Some of the leading universities, BHU, some universities in Patna, in Bihar, in Bengal, also AMU. They were all on a very rapid decline, which has been discussed elsewhere in several books. And that is the context in which, we really saw JNU emerging or JNU being established. The higher education scenario at that particular point of time, if one were to perhaps look at the statistics, were predominantly in creating more spaces and opportunities for the property classes, the prevailing property classes, and the elite, and so on and so forth. In spite of the expansion which had taken place in various areas of higher education, the reach of the deprived sections, marginalized communities, was very, very limited. If one were to perhaps go by the statistics, the higher education enrollment was 1.5. The TER was 1.5 for the lowest community, that is the community which in fact, and that pertained even in about 70s and 80s, until such a time that, there were struggles on a continuous basis to in fact bring about some kind of an element of social justice and inclusivity. When JNU was established and the first batch was taken in 1971 with the MPhil PhD program, the MA program came later. We really didn't have a very elaborate kind of a laid out admission policy. It was like anywhere else, where one would perhaps recruit students on the basis of marks or on the basis of other criteria. We didn't have a very formidable kind of principle on which one could perhaps recruit the students. It took nearly 3 to 4 years until about 74, and that really didn't happen because the administration or the teachers had a very some kind of an idea, but it was more so because of the students who in fact felt that the JNU admission policy has to be different because it's a university with a difference, and that is what is perhaps stated in the foundational principles of the university. So in order to augment access, given the fact that you could rather select people on the basis of merit being interpreted in various ways, the socio, cultural and economic dimensions which were being talked about, but there was hardly any statistics or hardly any kind of methodology which could be objectively introduced and implemented, and that was a major task before the JNU community. I think the Students' Union, which in fact had formed by then, there is hardly any record to in fact verify, but from whatever that I could really gather from people who were students here, they informed me that in 1974 there was some kind of a debate which was introduced. In 1974, there was some kind of a discussion both among the teachers and the students for some kind of admission policy which could be based on the required sensitivity to in fact expand the base of recruitment. So in 1974, as we know that we developed some kind of framework which was implemented for the first time in 1975. It was a 20-point scale of deprivation. So out of 100 marks, say for example, you had 50 marks for the written examination, 30 for the interviews. Mind you, then the interviews used to take place for every level of admissions. That means for the undergraduate, for the postgraduate, and also for the for the research programs. It was compulsory that everybody appeared for the written examination, and also based on that, they would also be interviewed. But alongside, and this constituted about 80 marks, 20 marks were given for various kinds of deprivations. At that time, we felt that some kind of index of deprivation has to be created, and so there were three different kinds of deprivations which were talked about. One was the economic deprivations, where in fact income and ownership of land, that means landholding and so on and so forth. These were taken into consideration. Social deprivation, depending upon which state the person came from, whether because by then several states had introduced some kind of OBC reservations, particularly in the south, not so much in the north, but also that was happening. There were different kinds of annexures, annexure 1, annexure 2 of the OBCs, which were incorporated. So, all those considerations were made. Besides, we already had to implement the ST/SC reservation, which was mandatory for the university to do that. So this was in addition to the SC/ST reservation. So the first important principle, which was in fact referred to, was that besides these deprivations, where SCs and STs were based on, of course, the SC deprivation was largely an outcome of the practice of untouchability, and the second, and that is ST reservation, was largely based on the criteria of access. That means if you are living in a remote area and so on and so forth, and it had nothing to do with poverty, or it had nothing to do with any other criteria. Just these two constitutionally determined criteria of deprivations were incorporated, and that these were the important principles on which the SC/ST reservations had to be implemented, of whatever 7.5% for the STs and 14.5%, 15% for the SCs. But in order to expand the base, particularly when we realized, and it was very much visible, that the deprivations were not just restricted to these two different kinds of vulnerabilities or deprivations. One had to really expand these, and in order to do that, precisely because largely India was an agrarian economy, an agrarian country, large number of people lived in rural areas. Structural problems were there, both at the level of infrastructure and also at the level of society and economy. So one needed to really consider all these parameters, and therefore incorporate some kind of a methodology. And at that particular point of time in 1975, the methodology was incorporated into a kind of a 20-point scale, which was the basis for the recruitment right until early 1980s, when it had to be revised in order to incorporate regional deprivations. Existed then, but then it was modified in order to expand the nature of regional or the spatial deprivations, which in fact continues in some ways even today, but certainly not for the admission to the research program. I'm told that it continues for the programs such as the masters and the undergraduate programs. So what was the index like? The index, in fact, took into consideration, as I said, economic deprivation, so income and land ownership were important. Social deprivations, on the lines that Kaka Sahib Palekar had talked about. Mandal Commission was still not there, so so whatever that existed in terms of OBC reservation that was incorporated, although Kaka Sahib Palekar's commission report was not accepted by the government. but in a certain way, because we were in a university where social scientists and other teachers and students were fully informed about the nature of deprivation. So OBC reservation, even before, one could really have it implemented or see that being implemented at the All India level in higher education, JNU had taken the initiative of, in fact, incorporating some kind of OBC reservation, which in fact was based on the statistics of the information in respective states. So if the students were applying from a particular state, if they were listed there in some way or the other among the list of the OBCs, they would be given some kind of point. So this was a 20-point scale. And this 20-point scale also had this major component of the regional deprivation. Now, what this regional deprivation really looks at? Regional deprivation looks at looks at various dimensions of how an area or a region or a place which in fact is provided or endowed with various kinds of facilities, and the areas which are deprived in terms of these infrastructural facilities, say schooling or various other kinds of economic investments and so on and so forth. It was understood that there are deprived people even in rich areas, in relatively better off areas, and that there were people even in worst of areas who are not so deprived. So in order to in fact bring about some kind of inclusivity where one could reach out to people in rural areas, in far off areas, create a kind of an condition so that they could compete with people who are perhaps the students who have come from metropolitan backgrounds, who have come from better educational backgrounds, and so on and so forth. So first of all, it was suggested that that candidates who have had any kind of an exposure until about matriculation, if they have obtained their matric degree or secondary degree from a private school, they would be given other kinds of deprivation points, but certainly they would not be entitled to deprivation points on the basis of the lack of access to public education or so on and so forth. So that was one criteria. So at that particular point of time, the regional deprivation was based on two or three important parameters. One was certainly literacy, and the other was, state per capita income, which had to be broken down into some kind of which had to be evolved at the district level. So, so it was not an index which was only confined to a state. It was an index which was bottom up. That means, one was really trying to reach at the bottom level of the administrative structure. One would have been happier if one could perhaps, construct the index at the level of the development blocks. But because the lack of statistics, it was thought that we should perhaps construct these indices for the at the level of the district. So so the regional deprivation based on literacy and per capita income and so on and so forth, was taken into consideration and in the first stage. And but then it was also not found to be very, very useful in the sense that, particularly with income, because income certificates were not really reliable. The land statistics that were obtained from Tehsildar were not found to be correct. So, the administration did try to, in fact, inquire about some of these, and they found that the information that was provided were not correct, or they were, one could perhaps see that there was a lot of anomalies there. So this system was abandoned, and regional deprivation points were introduced for all time. So for the next 3 decades, 91 onwards, I think it was mid-80s onwards. 91 was the first index, which was comprehensive. Then after we have and all these indices, regional deprivation indices, were created on the basis of the census data and the data obtained from the Ministry of Agriculture and so on and so forth. So it was a difficult task, and the most sensitive indices, which in fact to begin with it was literacy level, which was later on was further revised into literacy among or illiteracy among women. The second index was participation of workers in non-agricultural activities, which was seen to be a kind of a positive indicator. And there was one more indicator, yes, the per capita, it was the land productivity per hectare. Earlier it was based on limited aggregation of the crops because it was a rural-based economy, and that perhaps was the most sensitive indicator. Earlier we started with nearly about 20-25 crops. Later on, based on the studies which were conducted in CSRD by Professor Bhalla, which is the agricultural growth work, which started from looking at the tranium in the 60s and 70s, and so and there have been 5 different editions on that. So we expanded the number of crops to over 36, and by the time the last exercise was done, that was in 2011, we were in a position to incorporate more than about 40 crops. And the productivity levels were worked out on this basis. Now one could perhaps raise this question that initially there were fewer crops, and therefore whether it was representative of the all India situation, because there could be certain crops which were not being grown elsewhere. Crop diversity and cropping pattern being such. But and of course the agricultural data was also very limited for some of these crops. But as the data was expanded and it was made available, we were in a position to incorporate that. And we were continuously evaluating the impact of the regional deprivations, which were based on these 3 indices. Of course, they were changed, there were modifications in between. So the index, which was there in 91, was reformed in 2000. In 2001, was again reworked on in 2011. The major problem, another problem that we were facing during that particular point of time, that you work it out for a number of districts which are reported in the census, in a particular, because the censuses are conducted only after 10 years. You don't have elaborate information for newly created districts. So that used to be always a problem, because by the time you started with 300 some districts, and you were admitting the students late in 80s or 90s, you found that the number of districts have gone up. So how do you really make adjustments? So this was a real problem, and therefore some of us who were involved in this kind of an exercise were continuously being asked by the admissions branch as to what do we do now. There's a new district which has been carved out, so how do we really work out its score on the deprivation points? We resorted to, in fact, assigning the same value from where a new district was created from the older one, and that was the only way out, because one couldn't really estimate any other way. So with all these limitations, I think the intake or the nature of intake and the diversity of the students, which in fact came in the 80s, 70s, 80s, it really showed that this index is working. And if one were to perhaps take a look at the annual reports of JNU and look at the statistics on admissions, we'll find that in several centers and in schools, the proportion of those who came just by the virtue of regional deprivation points became very significant. And that was visible in our hostels, in our classrooms, the kind of diversity in the classrooms that perhaps we saw in JNU, both as a student. I was a student here from 1977 to 84, and later in 88 when I joined as faculty, I really saw the kind of diversity in hostels, in the classrooms, that brought in the kind of richness both in the academic content and the social life. One could perhaps imagine about or maybe look at the map of India in one way or the other. But what India really comprised of was a kind of an experience precisely because we had students not only from northern parts or from particular states, but we had students from almost all parts of India. And it was an experience living with them, interacting with them, and so on and so forth, both in the classroom and outside. So the objective, or maybe one of the principles of inclusivity, was implemented through the deprivation points, which I think is one of the most unique features that continues to define the JNU admission policy even today. Although I believe, in terms of its impact, it has come down. Somehow, nobody has studied it, but it is my feeling, precisely because in just about 7-8 years ago, I really started looking at some of the statistics as to what is the impact of the regional deprivation in terms of the JNU admission policy. And we found out that, and again, let me also tell you, and with a certain amount of pride, that JNU was again not only was responding to regional deprivation as an important indication which perhaps impacts everybody, not only people from the deprived communities, but also people from not so deprived communities, and therefore the structural problems which in fact obtained in certain areas, would impact everybody equitably. So therefore, that was the principle on which, this whole idea was implemented upon. Of course, we also had, say, a couple of reports at the All India level of the backward areas and so on and so forth. That was a time when also there were special attempts being made by Planning Commission in order to promote hill area development, desert area development, and so on and so forth. So the degree or the hierarchy of deprivations, which in fact existed at the regional level, at the spatial level, were addressed in some way or the other through this mechanism. But at the same time, we felt that there was a need to in fact do something about the gender deprivations. And again, I must say, and I must congratulate the JNU community for having taken the initiative of introducing gender deprivations also. So across the board, if there is a woman candidate who would perhaps be entitled to something like 5 marks, which really enhanced the composition, the gender composition of the students on the campus, especially in the last 2 decades or more. But at the same time, while one was moving in this direction, I felt, and at that particular point of time, I was assisting both the Dean of the Students' Office as well as the admissions, and I realized that somewhere the gender deprivation marks, which comprised of 5 full marks being assigned to the candidate, was in a way diminishing the impact of regional deprivation. In a particular year, I remember I looked at the statistics and I found that the number of students who were admitted precisely or on account of regional deprivation had come down drastically. Why? Because the regional deprivation marks would go to the maximum of 4 marks, and the gender deprivation marks would go to 5 marks across the board. So one was really the metropolitan woman would cancel out the non-metropolitan woman and also the men. And that is where, the impact was becoming somewhat limited. So there was a proposal which is there in the files of the university. Somehow it could not be implemented. We created some kind of a scale where, it was suggested that, the metropolitan woman coming from metropolitan areas, from public schooling background, may be given because of the fact that under all circumstances, women are deprived in all classes. So they could perhaps, be given lower marks as opposed to women who are coming from, say, rural background, from non-public school background, and so on and so forth. That, of course, was debated in a committee which was headed by Ajay Patnaik, and the committee submitted its report. That was just about 7-8 years ago, but perhaps it was never deliberated upon, or it was never translated into creating a kind of an index which could perhaps keep the regional deprivation marks intact and would not let it to be allow it to be overshadowed by gender deprivation. Not that there was any kind of a tug of war between the two, but structurally, because of the kind of an index that was introduced, one needed to really look at as to how one index was cancelling out the impact of the other index. So that is where we were until the time that the administration decided to, in fact, bring about a change in the regional deprivation statistics. And the latest that I'm told, and I'm not fully aware, I don't have a document to suggest as to whether these are the indices, which have been introduced because of the pandemic and all that. So I think it was introduced just about 3 years or 4 years back. Now the index is based on women literacy, access to toilet at the household level, and then there are 2 more indicators. Perhaps one is a percentage of rural population, and one more. Now, if one were to perhaps take a look at some of these indicators, then one has to really first of all look at as to what is the degree of variability. If the variability is low, then the impact of these indicators in defining the level of deprivation or the sensitivity of this indicator will decline, because everybody has the same level of deprivation. So that would be very difficult for you to, for us to in fact identify that. But I'm told that the regional deprivation is now working on these 4 criteria. The income or maybe land productivity has been taken out. I think that remains still a very, very important attribute. I mean, those who work in the area of agriculture will perhaps understand the rural income is predominantly dependent on productivity levels, and therefore it's a very, very important indicator. The other indicator, which was workers in non-agricultural activities, or if you can reverse it, workers engaged in primary activities, that has also been taken off. I think there is a need for us to in fact bring these 2 back, in addition to in fact expanding it to incorporate several other parameters. Around 2011, we were also looking at, and we were positively looking at the fact that once this socio-economic caste census is completed and the statistics are made available, then perhaps it will be possible for us to expand the deprivation scores in JNU by incorporating several other factors. But then, as we all know, that the data of socio-economic class census is not available. It's only available for some indicators at the state level. Therefore, in the absence of any reliable data to further expand the JNU admission policy in terms of its the impact of deprivation marks has become a real problem. But where do we stand now in terms of policy? So, and that's where we have the new education policy, and where does the new education policy allow us to use these deprivation marks? As we all know, that in spite of the new education policy talking about the access and equity and excellence, all around, both in the school sector and higher education sector, there are, I think, I'll stop here and, talk about new education policy and its relationship with deprivation marks at a later stage. So this is what I thought, I'll share with you insofar as the deprivation marks and the JNU's unique feature on expanding education, particularly higher education. And it has certainly had an impact, which we can see it around, we can see it in this particular hall also, and we have seen it in a much bigger way in the past. I believe, we'll continue with the deprivation marks and rather expand it in order to, in fact, make it far more effective in terms of recruitment policy. Thank you very much.
Okay, fine. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Sinha. Now over to Dr. Harish Wankhede.
A very warm Jai Hind, Jai Birsa, Jai Jyotiba to all of you. You all say greetings. I'm very thankful to JNUTA and feel absolutely privileged to be part of such awesome event, especially sharing the space with Professor Pachuau and Sachidanand Sinha. And of course, I hope that Professor Sonajharia Minz will join us very soon. We are celebrating the history of JNU in extremely brutal times, especially a period when the idea of university has been disturbed, the intellectuals are constantly threatened, and the academic scholarship has to toe the lives of the political establishment. Defending the revolutionary characteristics of the university in such is must in such depressive times. JNU has performed his role in the time of crisis earlier, and I am hopeful that even against the ongoing attacks on higher education, university system, and the critical thinking by the current dispensation, the JNU community is under pledge to carry the battle relentlessly and to defend our intellectual freedom, autonomy, and great university character that JNU is known for. While saying this, as a mandate of this panel has suggested, let me take this opportunity to think about JNU and its relationship with socially marginalized communities, particularly in the recent past. And the way Professor Sinha also suggested that probably often the SC/ST OBC communities are seen as what they call a policy subject. And I think that is the larger concern often suggested when we are speaking about social justice policy. Probably I will take a little point on that. In yesterday's panel discussion, Professor Robila Thakur and Purushottam Agarwal gave us a nostalgic trip of JNU's rich past. We witnessed how JNU was truly engaged with critical thinking and revolutionary ideas. We also heard that the institution was deeply concerned about social diversity, and therefore in JNU's admission policy or the policies of social justice were more authentic and substantive than the others. Professor Sinha just elaborated that the deprivation fund system was of course unique in JNU. Especially the application of deprivation point or the thought to have preparatory classes for the marginalized students, which was Thapar yesterday spoke about this, or the fulfillment of reservation quotas for ST and STs has made this university a significant site where policies of social justice are sincerely executed. Our nostalgia of JNU often revolves around this aspect that the panelists yesterday and even today, the way Professor Sinha suggested, were reflected so well. For a student coming from a marginalized community, it is almost like listening to the great philanthropist act that the ancestors of this university have performed to make this university a better place for the academics, but also providing a helping hand to the poor marginalized groups. I found that most of such narratives about JNU's past, there is a paternalistic tone towards the Dalit, Bahujan and Adivasi students, often relegating them as the passive recipients of the profits that JNU has offered to them for all these years, and thus has made JNU a socially sensitive university. And therefore, the term that I have used, that we are just a subject of a policy document. We all know that the access of education is denied to Dalits and Adivasis in whole of history, and there is, and therefore it is must to cherish that there is a university, JNU particularly, that takes good care of the marginalized groups, provide them access of quality education, and make them a better citizen. Though most of these anecdotes can be valued and celebrated by each of us present here today, I will request you to take a little pause on the same theme. While acknowledging these facts, I want to offer a deeper and critical intervention here, especially to examine the substantive role of the university towards fulfilling the values of social justice. Let me argue that for a very long time, JNU has understood the idea of representation, but not the value of social justice. And let me argue. This can be substantiated by looking at this panel and the topic given to us. For the organizers of JNU Mosaic, it was prudent to think about social diversity, especially the representation of Dalits, Bahujan and Adivasi in this fest. About my presence in this mosaic, I am sure that more than me representing JNU today as an idea, I am allowed to share this dais mainly to represent the Dalits and their exclusive perspective. The others can represent the JNU in general, but a Dalit Adivasi person can only represent his or her social body and particular concern. They can be clubbed under the social justice rubric and thus complete the mosaic. The problem that I wish to raise here is therefore very simple. Is there a possibility to see a Dalit intellectual or Adivasi scholar to cherish JNU's past similarly, the way Professor Thapar or Professor Agarwal has done so well in yesterday's education? I think the answer of this question lies in the answer of this question lies the limits or the problems of JNU's celebrated past. I believe that even to represent the Dalit perspective in this fest, there are better scholars and intellectuals around. Professor Gopal Guru, Professor Sudhir Thoral, Vivek Kumar, Vaya Saloni, Jyoti Atwal, Pradeep Shinde, etc. could have given a better and intellectually vibrant perspective on JNU's life. But instead, I am standing here in this great gathering, mainly to take the box of However, I do not wish to miss the fantastic opportunity. Let me say a few critical things about JNU with an expectation that the audience will appreciate my criticality, freedom, and the diversity of my views. I came to JNU from a very small town called Nagpur in Maharashtra. In our socio-political culture, Shivaji, Jyotiba Phule, and Ambedkar were omnipresent. There was no day when we will not salute Jai Bhim. When I entered in JNU, it was shocking for me that the iconic figures with whom I am so deeply attached are almost alien in this land. The academic culture of the socio-political activism was overtly dominated by left Marxist ideas and values. So I appreciated the revolutionary and critical methods around which the academic and political sphere were organized, and I overwhelmingly participated in. There was always an apprehension about my own position in this discourse. The political values that I cherished so emotionally at my hometown had very few takers, as I said, Ambedkar or Phule for that matter. For example, there was a spatial cultural platform named United Dalit Students Forum, where Dalit Adivasi issues were raised exclusively, but similar facilities were not available elsewhere. And there was basically, as I said, a cornered spaces for these issues. I believe that such anxiety has always burdened the Dalit Adivasi students whenever they enter into the domain, as I said, created and crafted by the social elite. That it is a space which we have crafted. We are welcoming you to become part of this domain. It was a norm to believe that the elites can represent their social body and political concern exclusively, mostly related to the problems of discrimination, fulfillment of reservation policy, the way I am doing it here today, and their demand for more financial aid. Where the social elites can comment on greater universal issues, namely the theories of justice, nationalism, imperialism, globalization, secularism, human rights, environment, and so forth. And that division of intellectual labor was visible, however, for a long time. JNU has not pondered about these divisions. I encountered a term called Dalit Marxist and keep on thinking about it. I realized that whatever may be my academic and intellectual credentials, it will not be possible for me to escape my Dalit body. Even if I convince myself about such great escape, probably others will keep on recognizing me as a Dalit. I noticed that JNU allows people to operate with such nuanced vagabond typecast. Many will adore the Dalit identity and promote it without any hesitation, like the activists of UDSF at that part of time. Some will escape it and some will adopt a new nomenclature, like I thought that I am a Marxist activist at that part of time, or even today, some of also adopt what they call the Hindutva Wala Avatar or a Bhakt identity. Probably JNU has not thought enough about the psychological burdens under which the Dalit Adivasi students survive in this campus. As a philanthropist guardians, our JNU ancestors have offered that the institution will provide us some deprivation points, like as I said, policy, reservation policy, remedial classes, and there was kind of a large elaboration on this in the last lecture. Free hostels, like fellowships or free hostels, and help us to get a prestigious degree from JNU. I believe that this is a tokenistic procedural approach and lacks the value of social justice. That you are just a part of the frame and hardly have any other value as other intellectual class. JNU has a limitation to appreciate the Dalit Adivasi discourse as a representative voice of the institution, or has a heart to suggest that the Dalit Adivasi and Bahujan students, faculty members, and activists can represent the character of JNU similarly the way others have done in the past, like as I said, other work for that matter in yesterday's lecture. Like many other students, the socially marginalized groups have, of course, heavily benefited from the great practices, infrastructural facilities, and vibrant intellectual atmosphere. However, we fail to become the leaders, spokespersons, or celebrities of this university. There is a subtle othering of these groups in JNU. Maybe the lack was inside us. However, in that case, it was the moral responsibility of the university to help us in overcoming that lack and make us greater intellectuals and scholars. We need to ponder why JNU have not produced tall intellectual leadership amongst the Dalit Bahujan Adivasi groups, which will not only respected only by its particular caste segments, but can be adored, loved, and trusted by the whole JNU community. For the future of Dalit Adivasi the Dalit Adivasi quotient needs a different orientation. Alongside pondering about helping and caring about their livelihood, admission in different courses, renewal of remedial and preparatory classes, and scholarship, the current leadership of JNU must also think about celebrating the Dalit Adivasi as intellectuals and leaders, and shall not utilize them merely as a token representative in any mosaic. They shall not be dedicated mainly to speak about their particular social and class concerns, but allow them to deliberate on every other issue on which the others are deliberating for all the years. The aim of JNU shall not hover around the idea to make the university more promising and welcoming towards socially marginalized groups, but shall take one step further and think how the Dalit Adivasi students and faculty can take the future of this university in their own hand and provide a vibrant, critical, and revolutionary atmosphere to all. Until such role reversal is done in JNU, the intellectual merit and social responsibility of the university will always be under doubt. Finally, with a firm belief that JNU will not only abide not only build fierce resistance against the enemies of intellectual reasons and the communal harmony, but will also deliberate honestly to allow substantive participation of Dalit, Adivasi, Bahujan and Muslims, not only as the students of this university, but also as faculty members, intellectual leaders, celebrities, and the icons of this great university. Thank you, Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Professor Sinha and Dr. Wankhede, for for highlighting to us not only the ways in which JNU has tried to make education accessible to all social margins, but also from Dr. Wankhede's elocution to also talk about the problems that that people from social margins have been facing. He went a bit autobiographical, and I also want to do that because most of you may think I'm from the Northeast, but I was born in Pune, and I graduated from Ferguson College in Pune, and all I studied was Shivaji. So when I came to JNU, under the University of Pune, we all studied only Shivaji, and from class 8 and onwards. And when I came to JNU, it was such a major shock for me when I realized that history went beyond Shivaji. So it was a great learning experience for me and so while I sort of understand what Harish has gone through in trying to adapt, I also recognize that. But I also recognize that these kinds of ways in which the university has tried to bring people in together has been a great learning experience for me as well. So it hasn't been completely, I would like to say it hasn't been completely a failure in that sense, because for me as a person from the Northeast, this was the first time I met a Naga. This was the first time I was meeting a Khasi, here in JNU. So in many ways, I think the idea of deprivation, the idea of these kinds of, I think it is a conscious sort of attempt at bringing people in. But of course, there's a lot to work on, and I do agree with Dr. Wankhede that we have to try and cultivate an environment in which, an intellectualism develops from all sections of society. Which brings me to the second sort of question that I want to pose, which is, we talk about inclusivity, we want to bring people from all social margins, but what about, is quality something that becomes expendable in the process? This is not to say, there's often an allegation that people from scheduled SC, ST categories that include myself are not as intelligent and things like that. Those are the allegations. So this is not in that sense, but I think as teachers, all of us have been realizing that, that maybe it's becoming more and more difficult to teach in the classroom because people are so varied and they come from different backgrounds. So I just want us to think about, even as the founding fathers or mothers or the founding leaders have said that, there should be a center of what was the word? Intellectual excellence should be something that is cultivated here. How does one sort of bridge this sort of thing between diversity, inclusivity, excellence, and also, I was just pointing towards maybe admission procedures that we're talking about increasingly these days. So I was just wondering, thank you so much, Sonja, for joining us. So I just want to talk about that, but then, and maybe you have some ideas on that, and or I don't know how to go about it, but maybe I'll have Sona catch her breath a bit, and then then maybe you can talk to us about your experience in the university in Dumka about the issues that we're talking about, access to education. So maybe something about the entrance exams and things like that, in which we can focus on excellence with regard to the university. Anything?
Now, of course, the problems of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe students are often being discussed in most of the forums. That maybe because of their class position, the access of quality education in their hometowns, and many other such reasons are there, because of which probably there is a comparative understanding about how the students from elite Delhi colleges will perform in the class, and those who are coming from little backward regions or small municipal towns, how they will perform in the class. So there is always a kind of a comparative access around which the students are graded. And probably in that, while grading the students, probably we hardly understand this particular social and historical background. And we expect that the kind of what we call a very vibrant intellectual language that we use in our classroom to teach, or to some kind of a theoretical background that is required to understand most of the social science classes. We believe that some of these students were not capable to understand that. And probably therefore it was expected that to make them as par with other students, there is a requirement for something called a preparatory 1-year course, which IIT had earlier, or in JNU some kind of a remedial classes. But there is somewhere this acceptance is very much there, that the student coming from required sections lack that kind of a quality access of education, and maybe because of that, when they try to learn that particular thing in the classroom, they always lag behind. So that understanding is there. I think more than that, I think teachers also need to understand this particular fact and suggest that what they need to do to kind of make the education better, the access of quality education better. We do not have any kind of a formal arrangement to overcome that. Remedial classes is just a small initiative that we believe it is there in the university, but hardly in any center I believe that remedial classes functions really well. And therefore it becomes a burden of the student who are coming from that particular background to overcome that burden, to read more, to engage more with texts and other academic disciplines, and overcome that particular facility. So of course it's a kind of a heavy burden, because we allow students to come to this particular university from such backward locations and expect that probably they will understand those higher academic language in a proper shape. So of course that particular complexity is there, and we do not have any arrangement to overcome that.
Yeah, I agree with Harish, and based on my own experience, I do understand that, unless until there is some kind of formal mechanism built into the system, that it is very difficult to overcome the complex problem of delivering quality education to students from certain backgrounds. But let me also share my own experience that, being a social geographer, my classes and interacting with generations of students. If the teacher, even in the absence of a formal mechanism or a formal institutional arrangement, I think some small initiatives can be made. And I tried doing that at my own level, and this really became useful, because it really taught me a lot. Where I would interact with my students at individual level, because if you are teaching a course, if you are getting the tutorials, as to where they stand. So irrespective of who they were, I would reach out to as many of them, those who were weaker in certain areas, and try to engage with them in some way or the other. I really found that these interactions really helped me develop my tutorials or maybe my assignment framework in a much better way. So a kind of a continuous dialogue with students is very important, and I think that is possible only in a structure like JNU when the classrooms in a semester really is limited to 50 or 60. But if the classrooms is huge, then the kind of time that you could perhaps devote to students in their seminar papers and you listen to their seminar presentations. I'm absolutely of the view that most of us who came from Mufassil backgrounds, we had no access to libraries, we had no access to even teaching texts, which were available. We all used to, in fact, take examination on the basis of what is called guest papers. We were all, coming from a small town in Bihar. If you were to buy the original text or something, it's not available. The departments didn't have those texts. Even our teachers had not read those texts. So what to talk of, but then, वो जो जज्बा है कि भाई हम कुछ कर सकते हैं, और वो जज्बा, उस जज्बे को पंख मिलता है जब हम जेएनयू जैसी जगह में आते हैं, तो एक बहुत बड़ा और जब आपके पास सहूलियतें होती हैं, when you have the infrastructure, when you have access to libraries, the library is open 24/7, when the teachers are available at any point of time and you don't have to really ring up your teacher and say, sir, are you available on such and such day? I think, this access is not just sitting in the classroom and going to the library, but also interacting with your teachers. Let me add something about the built-up spaces in JNU. You see, this JNU has not been built like, this is the teachers or faculty residential area, and this is the Karamchari residential area, and this is the students residential area. If you look at the original plan, the original plan had more than 3 sectors or 4 sectors. We talk of directional sectors like Pachuau and Dakshinapuram and Uttarakhand and whatever, and Purvanchal. But it was to be much more than that. It was supposed to have 48 such complexes, 48 hospital complexes. That dream, I don't know, went down the drain. I don't know, it's somewhere stuck. Maybe जब नदियों की सफाई होगी तो वहाँ से मिलेगा. लेकिन सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत तो ये थी कि इनके सोचने वालों ने, जिन्होंने इस आर्किटेक्चर को डेवलप किया, उन्होंने देखा कि जब स्टूडेंट्स अपने कमरों से निकलें, अपने हॉस्टल से निकलें, so they will have an opportunity meeting their teachers, in the same road, because they're staying next door, that, you don't have to really have some kind of a control mechanism when in the middle of the night if students want to celebrate something and want to go loud, they will be conscious of the fact that, there are teachers staying next door. And these experiences have been a wonderful experience. So therefore, I would say that, it is the experience, it's incremental experience of how we need to do a lot more. But I think, JNU has been successful. And I look back and I feel very proud about the fact that, some of our experiments, some of our small initiatives have been successful, have really transformed the lives of people who, in fact, otherwise, they won't have been in a position to. I'm not saying this as in a paternalistic way, but I'm saying this precisely because it was a kind of a जैसे कहते हैं ना, सांस चलने की जो एक्सपीरियंस है, उसमें मुझे नहीं मालूम उन लोगों ने मुझसे क्या सीखा, लेकिन हमने बहुत कुछ सीखा, और वो एक बहुत बड़ा इम्पोर्टेंट है. ये जो टीचर्स के बीच, खास करके सोशल साइंसेज में, मेरे ख्याल से हर सीखने और लर्निंग प्रोसेस का ये हिस्सा होता है जहाँ पे आप सीखते हैं लगातार. तो वो उसका एक बहुत बड़ा, और ये एक ऐसा तजुर्बा है जो कोई हमसे छीन के नहीं ले जा सकता, और ये तजुर्बा जेएनयू का है, और जेएनयू से छीन के ले जाना भी बहुत मुश्किल होगा. ये बात मैं अच्छी तरह से समझता हूँ.
We'll go to Sona now, and maybe you can give us some of your experiences here or the experience at the university in Dumka to talk to us about education, access, and justice.
Nearly good afternoon. Apologies for being a bit late, but I'm happy I can join. Want to definitely express my gratitude to JNUTA for organizing an event like this, and it's like a fiesta for 3 days. And then we in our coming out of probably some of us from comfort zone to again a meeting point. And again, with the last point that Sachi mentioned, learning, because I would go ahead and say JNU has been a space of collaborative learning or lifelong learning in a sense. Therefore, from that point, I think having an event such as this only affirms that teachers are also willing to, sit and have not only collaborative, but then sit together in order to reflect and check, bring out certain checkpoints, or even to have our directions set for the future. My experience of JNU with reference to access, I would say way back in '86 when I applied for my MPhil in computer science here. I think in the country, very few institutions had degrees in computer science, and so I did come, and that was the first time. Before that, I didn't realize the privileges that I enjoyed, because I come from Central India tribes and around tribes, so I really didn't know what the privileges of being a tribe is, or in education space, because that was the first time my name had this postfix of ST, and prior to that I think I didn't need it, so it was not there. So never mind, I mean, that was a constitutional provision, and JNU exercised it then also, way back in '86. I got admission here, so therefore I'm trying to pin down that there was this possibility of access. Now, how difficult or easy, that again has different journeys to testify. But therefore, access through these provisions testify how it was. So those constitutional provisions, or let's say, if not, it was not mandatory then, but then JNU had that flavor. The openness or affirmative action, if there are all these nicer words also to present that commitment, right? So access was there. However, now justice, I'd like to mention when I joined in '92 as faculty, and then I think it wasn't JNU had not implemented reservation at even assistant professor's post at way back in '92. No, '92. So then, time and again, and those of us who joined before that, I think Diplit would testify, number of us who joined before '96 would say that although we had certain social background, and the posts advertised were unreserved, why the university was, trying to be a champion in fulfilling reservation, that way. So because that was one, well, just to state the facts, I have no problem. But then the conversations that I had to overhear, once I could overhear a conversation, हाँ वो तो ST है. Then other person realized that I could overhear, because this conversation was happening just 2 cabins away and we didn't have a closed ceiling. So the other person said, no, पर बहुत अच्छी हैं. Okay, I'm just trying to only mention 75 years of independent India. Education taking its own, milestones to achieve. and maybe not achieve too. But having come thus far today, but I'm talking about, this of, how many, it's, so 30 years, right? 30 years ago, I think the social fabric which impacts not only our, decisions, but our conversation has been so, I would not say insensitive, but then so blunt, and that one doesn't realize that how certain words could impact this is not again discrimination. This is just stating facts, right? But how one is being judged, you see. So that's about not treating anybody equal or as per because there was an assistant professor's job in computer science, right? So not judging me as an assistant professor in computer science, but then to getting to whatever is not written, I find that a bit, misfit, and therefore, how justice has a long way to go. I'm sure number of students, because those days the campus was not so thickly populated. I was in Godavari Hostel right from the beginning and managed to get a single room, so therefore, didn't have to negotiate on a daily basis or even to interact with another roommate, because I understand, because I've been advisor of equal opportunity of the chief advisor of equal opportunity office for 2 years, proctor for 4 years, even prior to that, advisor in an equal opportunity office, and the stories just rend my heart. Because the insensitive conversation or the terms that have been used, because I have heard those stories from students, they didn't even when one tried to mitigate and told the other person, listen, you said this, the person said, yes, huh. There was no, the person admitted, because, you see, but didn't realize until it was told that this is not done. You see? So there's acha, theek hai. So, what has education done to us? What has education in 75 years done in this country? As far as if education is empowerment or power and equalizer, it isn't done that. So so justice is still a far-fetched goal to yet achieve. And I think the students who are here, most of you would align with some of our stories, that you are here because probably your parents were literate. Probably, I'm saying, because we would have a full-scale first-generation learners also. And I think those who have been able to make it to JNU, majority of us who've been from margins of the society, are second generation. So it was the vision of the first generation which managed to help us either keep isolated with some of the day-to-day struggle, or if not, at least helped us face them and then come this far. So therefore, I want to congratulate all the students and teachers who are here, because our previous generation did that, and most of you would, I'm sure, say you are only a second generation and I'm only a second generation who went to school beyond class 10. No, beyond class 4 from my father's side. Okay, my father was the first one to go beyond class 4, and I'm the second, and so on. So the point is I'm still establishing that education is the equalizer and can help us, bring us here if opportunities are not missed. Why am I saying so? Now let me come to Dumka. Take you all to Dumka, which is a small town. You can walk the entire market. It's probably smaller than Munirka, or maybe as big as Munirka, the market there. And so nice, lazy town. Air, water, everything is fresh. So that's the best thing that could happen to me at COVID. Yes. Now, I would like to come to opportunity. The first year when there were admissions in undergrad, and again, it has the same picture that Sachi mentioned about any Mufassil college and etc. Yeah, most of the students are only asking for notes to teachers who themselves may not have access to the books. Because libraries are there, but now, I'll come to that a little later, but then access. Out of 27,000 odd, so let's say less than 28,000, who took admission in 28 colleges for the BA, BSc, BCom. Can you guess how many would have been for science? I'll start with the most depressing faculty, okay? Commerce were 700 and odd. Out of 20, let's say, let me underestimate 27,000. Okay, now let me come to the next. Science, 3,700 and something, okay? Now here is the question of opportunity. I do agree with Harish, and when we talk about the vocabulary, which can be so overloaded, which is not, or is the students coming from little remote places are not familiar with. Now here is a discipline, science, which doesn't have overloaded words. Subtraction means subtraction. Okay, sine theta means sine theta. That's a math. Even in chemistry, physics, everything, and any discipline of science does not have more than one meaning. Why such subjects are not, why have they not reached the students? They are still away from the students. They are not up in all those schools where students could just attend. Plus two. Why I said the school is because plus two. These subjects are not in the same proportion they are in plus two being taught, at least in my region, Santal Pargana. I will not try to claim for the rest of Jharkhand. So, having said that, if these subjects which are so easily understandable, not being available to all, and I would like to again add an anecdote. In my class 1, when I took admission, of course Hindi is not my mother tongue by now, but otherwise I couldn't understand anything except probably addition, subtraction and multiplication. Because Hindi, that was the only thing that was taught probably, and arithmetic, okay? And civics, we had our classes outside. So that was interesting, but I could not deal with the language that was the medium of instruction, but only thing I understood was arithmetic. And if arithmetic is not taught in all of these schools in class 1 also, I'm right now not also for these preschools being so active that students are ready at age 6. So therefore they are right in when they enter school, they are prohibited from these disciplines, these subjects, which would not be, which would not have overloaded words. So therefore, the question is that of the opportunity. And these opportunities, 75 years, and these opportunities have not become equal. Even you go certain distance from the main town. And so access is still a question. If the schools are there, let us not be happy. I keep telling the public representative, I'm just not happy by the numbers of schools. They should not be happy by the number which passes out, but we need to see the sections or subgroup subsets of this number. How many are there? Is there an equal opportunity to study any subject? And so therefore, I have all respect, and I actually admire all those who study social science, because I think I wouldn't have been able to deal with it, and my inclination is that. But the point I'm making is access is still a matter. And therefore, when access is not uniform, at least in certain region, or you go certain distances from a main town, then justice is, anyway, still remains a bigger question.
Thank you, Sona. You reminded me to in fact deliberate upon and share some of my concerns. If one were to look at the new education policy, then it is one of the most important highlights of the new education policy policy is, in fact, close down schools in the name of what you call rationalization. Rationalization of teachers, rationalization of students' strength, not realizing that a typical village in Santhal Pargana or in Kodarma or in Singhu would not have more than 20 households. And a 20 household village would not have more than 10 or 12 children, if one were to perhaps go by any statistics. Now if one were to perhaps look at India, then, nearly about 1/3 of the villages of India, they are of sizes which is less than 1,500 in terms of the population. And if one were to convert this into kind of school-going children, and I have contributed a paper on this somewhere, it will not work out to be having maybe 30 or 40 children in a particular age group, which will be attending the primary classes. Now, if the schools are being closed down in the name of rationalization as part of this, then, we are creating yet another layer of deprivation. We have arrived at, and you very rightly, you pointed out that, we should not be happy just with the numbers. But, we've got to really do something about it. What the new education policy is doing is, and I will take this opportunity to share with you, that the new education policy is a modern Manusmriti, is the 21st century Manusmriti. It has added on to the kind of layers that we have already created in this country in the name of education. School education in our country is so graded. You have one for one class and the other for the other class. You have the Kendriya Vidyalaya and you have the Navodaya Vidyalaya, and you can have another stream of schools, in the name of, say, the tribal educational development, Eklavya, Eklavya had to really do away with his thumb and not even have an access to the teacher. If that is what is Eklavya, then, we are really talking about the kind of things, which are likely to be created. Just to add, nearly about 60% of schools in India, they do not have science labs. More than 60%, or maybe nearly about 7%. And this is the latest statistics from the DIAS data. They do not have science teachers. And this is at the +2 level. And below +2, that means, say, in secondary classes, in lower classes, science subjects are being taught by teachers who never had access to science learning. So you can just imagine, physical education का teacher जो है वो अंग्रेजी पढ़ाते हैं पंजाब में, है ना? और ये मैंने एक पंजाब पे काम किया तो उसमें हमने देखा है. तो इस तरह से अगर हमारा एलोकेशन है टीचिंग का, और आपको मालूम है कितने खाली पोजीशंस पड़ी हुई हैं, तो ये एक बहुत बड़ा कंसर्न है. और इसीलिए जो नए इस न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी के तहत जो प्राइवेटाइजेशन और रैशनलाइजेशन की बात हो रही है, और उसमें फिर हमारा ये डिप्रिवेशन पॉइंट्स, एफर्मेटिव एक्शन का क्या रोल होगा, इस पे ज्यादा चिंता करने की जरूरत है. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, GER is that number, right? Yeah, where everybody feels very happy, or that is where things stop. Well, in Santhal Pargana, I can literally claim, in the considering the undergrad and postgrad, more than 50% of the classroom is filled with tribal students. Now, if intentionally these concerns that we are raising of the schools being actual schools or places where teaching is happening, I'm wondering whether it's just making that a vacuum rather than another set of schools. So therefore, is there a geographical marginalization now?
Yes. 40,000 schools in Jharkhand have been closed down already.
I just want to say that please also make comments on the new education policy, since Professor Sinha has
yes, of course, on that. Probably most of the discussions is mainly around the accessibility, that whether the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or the OBC students will get better access in the upcoming new education policy where privatization and commercialization of education will take place. Of course, while suggesting this, that probably government will surely reflect on this kind of proposal, that there shall be some access of marginalized communities in this new education policy, and probably on rhetorical level they can also provide some kind of a policy framework to do that. But probably more than that, I think there is also a requirement to understand that education is not only for the entry point at the entry level, that you access education and the things are done. Probably the way, like for that, even in JNUTA and probably Minz also suggested the same thing, that the kind of subtle practices of discrimination that generally happens in most of the campuses, the kind of a language that we use to understand the people coming from the deprived communities, or even the atrocities and violences, like as I said, that probably Rohit Vemula's case in Hyderabad Central University is one of the major cases of that kind of a brutal institutional violence against the students. So that kind of issues are there, and probably in the larger run-up of that, we should allow institutions to understand the claims for access from the deprived communities, but what happens once they get into the university? The kind of barricades or distancing that they feel and face when getting the education, or even the cases of atrocities and discrimination that are around at that part of time, we hardly had any policy framework to rectify that. And therefore, when the Rohit case happened in HCU, there was a claim that there should be some kind of a what they call Rohit Act in the parliament, which will understand that how the institutions are tackling the issues of discrimination and marginalization of the students. I think on that there is much more debate and discussion required, and probably, but we are mostly discussing issues that are related to access and quality education. But the problems that the Dalit Adivasi working students face in the university, and how to kind of make a policy framework or an institutional practice around that, probably we need to think more on that.
Thank you very much. And
Well, again, the region I come from, so therefore, right now, therefore, in NEP, the provision of mother tongue education in school, I see has an opportunity as well as, if not dealt with, the downside side. Now, if the teachers are not speaking in the language the child understands, which happened to me, then obviously that becomes an access issue inside the institution, right? But then when are the teachers getting equipped? When they have completed all their studies and they decide to, but wonder if they decide to be teachers, because that's what I've seen. That's an option. अभी यही कर लेते हैं, B.Ed ही कर लेते हैं, नौकरी तो मिल जाएगी. Now, if that has been at the background of why they are doing B.Ed, how they would complete the entire curriculum and pass out, I feel very sad. And so, even if in my university, if I insist that Santali, Koro, Malto, and I think Angika and Khorta, if these are going to be the 5 languages compulsory in B.Ed, so that a teacher takes up at least one of these, and otherwise, besides these 5, none, okay, only then I would be confident that we would be preparing teachers for Santal Patna. And if they are not prepared to be teachers in Santal, if they don't want to be teachers in Santal Patna, then go to other university now. Wherever they want to be teachers. Okay, that's my attitude. Point number 1. So therefore it needs to be carefully dealt with and provision. Okay. Now I think why we are talking about the gap, access has happened, and then rationalization and etc. What has happened to the budget for education? 2.6 only, no. So if this is the outcome of 2.6%, right? And not even the 6 which was originally envisaged, right? So in order to make up for this 2 or 3 generational gap, I don't know how we will do it. So that's been, I was very surprised that, or shamelessly it's been put that it's been 2.6. That's there in the document. Now, vocationalization of undergrad programs is again a forceful way of bringing before the students that they be skilled in order to probably deal with the employment issue. We can, again, there are philosophical debates as to what was the purpose of education, or whether it should be a parameter also for employability and etc. etc. And somehow, I think again, hierarchically listing the skills based on the kind of skill it is, again is a deterrent to people willingly taking up certain vocational or skill-oriented courses. And so bringing it to the university is not doing justice, judicious glorification. Because unless again in the society, the dignity of labor is somehow brought in, I think all the skills will again be graded and there will be caste system, there is a caste system of the skills, right? Let us not be. And I would definitely like to see, because I feel this is how the certificate after you leave, if you leave after 1 year, diploma if you leave after 2 years, it's just glorification of dropout.
Yes.
So therefore, I've been trying to talk to teachers. Let us believe the student who's taken admission is passing out with a degree. Okay. So let us have those provisions that if a student has really compulsive reasons to go out after 1 year, and now if we have credit transfer, multiple entry, multiple exit, why this certification and etc. Just to make the exit dropout glorified.
Yeah, so there, you can see that there's a lot of issues with our education system, and access is one thing, justice in education is another thing. So, and we have a lot of questions here. I was thinking of asking a little bit more about foreign universities and things like that, but I guess in the course of the conversation, if it comes up, it comes up. And I think since we have only half an hour, maybe it's wise to take up some of the questions that have been posed. Oh, another thing that I want to say is that I think we really need to seriously think about language, in our education, because as Ramana pointed out yesterday as well, I think this is one stumbling block, and for many of us, to access higher education, we need English, and yet at the same time, most of us are not equipped to speak in that language, and we find it difficult to engage intellectually in a language that is not our own mother tongue as well. So there are many issues, especially in higher education, and yet we know that English provides us a way to, as academics, the global sort of academic platform as well. So I think that is one thing that educationists have to really think about as well. So there are some questions here, and I don't think we can go through many of them. I've tried to sort of put them together, but even that is quite difficult. So maybe we'll just take up some, and anybody who feels like answering can answer as well. So there is a question here. On the one hand, government of India does not want to conduct caste census. But on the other, they want to bifurcate OBC reservation into well-off and non-well-off OBC. What are your views on that? Because census is a population data, but any other study is not. I think that's one. I'll just take 2 or 3, okay? And then maybe we can answer them. The second question here is, not found suitable is used many times during the faculty recruitment. So what is the take of JNUTA on that? is there still a need to give depreciation points on the basis of economic background when EWS reservation is there? If we give still, then the fair playing field will be maintained. If we do, yeah, well, that's a question. And then the last one, since the topic of the conversation is education, access and justice, my question is regarding injustice to category students in PhD admission. Most of the backward class, Dalit and Adivasi students don't have good conversational skills because of various reasons. So despite scoring well in CBT exam, they could not express themselves in Viva. How is it justified to insult them by giving 0, 1, 2, 3 marks, etc.? Is there possibility to remove human involvement in PhD admissions? If possible, then how? If not, then how? So those are some of the questions. And I'll ask our panelists to answer whatever.
The last question. Now, of course, I remember when we were students, of course, even that part of time, these issues were raised by the Students' Union and, of course, there is obviously student organizations that the direct Adivasi students, mainly because of their the kind of education that they get in their hometowns, because of that, the kind of language they use to present themselves is, of course, not what they call the urban language. And maybe because of that, they get less marks and not less marks, even 0, 1 or 2, and therefore they never qualify. And of course, this is a kind of a problem which is there in JNU for a very, very long time. Now, being a faculty member and sitting in the panel to admit students, I also understand this problem, and probably, therefore, at least in my center, I can suggest that we decided that no student from any category will get below 5 marks. That was the condition that we applied. There will be no 0, there will be no 1. And below, because he has qualified, he is entering, and maybe we understand that students will lack that kind of a facility of language, and therefore no student should get below 5 marks in any interview, and that possibility we did in our center. But of course, apart from that, there is, of course, what we call subtle elitist tendencies amongst us, all of us, that we believe that those speak a better language with good English should be admitted. Those who have that kind of methodological way to present their synopsis, they should get better marks. And of course, our own prejudices and our own concerns are there when we admit our students. How to overcome that, I don't know. Probably nobody amongst us will have that kind of a qualification to argue that this is the best way to admit a student in campus. There will be prejudices, there will be certain biases towards certain students, and that is what is happening from engineering for a very long time. We need, of course, to think a better mechanism, but for time being, I don't think that we have any such mechanism available.
Yeah, I agree with Harish, but I do understand that we can perhaps think of some kind of an alternative that based on the written examination, and the written examination of the kind that is being now proposed is the MCQ based, which I personally would reject. I mean, I don't think that really captures the skills or maybe the abilities of the students. But okay, I mean, if you have one or the other kind of entrance examination, then it could be for research programs. I think it can be an extended period during which the students who have qualified are in touch with, say, faculty for a longer period of time, and to develop their proposal. And it becomes just the proposal which becomes the point of interaction between the faculty and the students. That's a long-term process, which I think would not be a futile exercise. I believe not everybody comes with the skill or maybe the training to develop a kind of proposal, but that's 6 months kind of a duration before that happens. Now, that's a long-drawn project, and there is no harm trying that. that will perhaps diminish to some extent the kind of biases that are likely to happen in a 10 minutes interview. Because in a 10 minutes interview, what do you do? I mean, 10 minutes में वो 10 teachers को, faculty members को बैठ के देखते हुए वो नर्वस हो जाते हैं, तो मुंह से तो आवाज ही नहीं निकलती, वो तो शब्द निकलेगा, कौन सा निकलेगा, मदर टंग निकलेगा, अंग्रेजी निकलेगा, इसी में प्रॉब्लम है। तो ये तो हम सबों के साथ दिक्कत होती है। तो मेरे ख्याल से उस इंटरव्यू के बजाय अगर हम इस तरह की कोई व्यवस्था करें कि एक लंबे समय तक 6 महीने का कोई एक प्रोसेस हो जिसमें वो तमाम सारे लोग अपने फैकल्टी के साथ और अलग अलग फैकल्टी से इंटरेक्शन करें, और but that requires a very different kind of an arrangement. I mean, that requires a kind of a commitment from the institutional side. And I think, if that can happen, and there's no harm trying that, then perhaps, some way out could be seen insofar as admission to the PhD program and maybe, minimizing those biases is concerned. Because then, you are not dealing with, say, a list of the students who are from the reserved category. You are dealing with just the students, well, we are all human beings and we have social biases of one kind or the other. We thought that perhaps, doing away with our surnames would help the situation as it happened in Bihar, that everybody removed their surname and they became Kumar or Ranjan. But finally, it is just the opposite. It is the more that you remove your surname, the greater biases set in. Well, this requires a very different kind of an intervention. But I think, through our own experience on this campus, in the last whatever period duration, I can say that, well, I've been here almost from 75 onwards. So it's been a long association. I think, these biases were, it was far different from the kind of biases that I see in my own hometown and other universities where I had the opportunity working. But, it has not completely diminished. That's something very important. Yeah.
Since this event is organized by JNUTA, I just want to mention one painful story or experience I have had, not in the JNUTA, but then, holding some of these administrative responsibilities also. I think, Sachi, while you mentioned that, some mechanism for students to be able to spend time before they actually are able to, or they are ready to take admission into PhD or research. It wasn't MPhil meant for that. Yeah. But then let us also accept, because some of us know it, that at MPhil, when it was MPhil PhD combined program, I think our biases went beyond the academic thing, and that system of MPhil was used to not allow certain students to continue. So the grades, which normally it so happens that, the dissertation is done in such a way that it could take the person, could help the person make up for the, because MPhil had coursework for 2 semesters only, right? First semester, everybody is just dealing with the new system. Second semester, probably they managed to improve the grades. But then, if the coursework is still certain short of, eligibility for admission to PhD, I think some of us teachers have seen to it that, that was also used to not allow certain students. So therefore, I'm not very sure whether, even if we have a formal mechanism, unless, we are truly educated towards equality, I think our biases might just manifest even in the formal system.
That is where I believe, what Harish was suggesting was that there has to be a mechanism built in to, in fact, deal with the discriminatory practices. Now, that's where, does it really help when you have the Equal Opportunity Office, or when you have, say, the grievance redressal mechanisms? In what way it helps? Have we done any kind of an evaluation of all these mechanisms within our own campuses in order to see as to how effective they have been. The best, of course, is the sexual GS cash experience. Well, but the administration may not respond in a positive way, or may not be willing to engage with us. But I believe, the students and the teaching community perhaps need to engage on a continuous basis. It's only then that perhaps we can perhaps think of an alternative.
On OBC caste census, of course, we should not look into this particular census just that it will provide us with some very important rich data. But of course, there is a political side of this particular debate. Why? Because the current dispensation, the BJP government is continuously claiming that there is some kind of a OBCization of the BJP has happened. And a large chunk of the OBC communities are now suggesting this kind of suggesting argument that voting for the BJP for a very, very long time, and the BJP has almost become an OBC party. And it was suggested that the profits of the government or the policies are now distributed among this. Probably the OBC caste census will basically challenge this kind of an assessment that the way BJP has become OBC, kind of almost controlled by the OBCs today, probably that can be challenged. I suggested that if you see the census data, probably in most of the institutions of power, the OBC number is almost negligible. Judiciary, probably bureaucracy, university administration, university faculty, probably the OBC number is almost negligible. And probably OBC data will provide us that kind of remedy and challenge this particular assertion that this current government is doing extremely well for the OBC. And for that particular reason, there can be a revival of what they call the OBC politics or social justice movement in India, and probably for that the caste census is very important.
Yeah, so we have about another 15 minutes because, and maybe we can take another round of questions and whatever feel appropriate and you can respond. So the other thing is, this is a question to Dr. Harish Wankhede. Would it be fair to say that while JNU plans for diversity in admission, it does not actively plan for inclusion post-admission? What measures do you think the JNU authorities must take to ameliorate the situation? Then there's another question to Professor Sinha. A few years ago, the government provided reservations for EWS students. What use does the JNU deprivation points system have? Okay. So that's one. Then, as I think this is for maybe for Sona or maybe one else. As the academic and professional space of business, entrepreneurship, finance and management is occupied by upper class and upper caste people only, isn't it important to prominently look into these streams in order for the growth and development of marginalized communities? Why we think that language and social science streams only shall be our main areas of study. Then, okay, anyone can contest for post seats under unreserved category. These are seats reserved for. There are seats reserved for SC, ST, OBC, and other categories. This has led to a fear among general category that they will be left behind. How do you help people deal with their fears? So I think maybe those are some of the questions that.
Not much. Probably after the implementation of the OBC reservation policy in the surely the social demography of JNU has really changed. Almost in each class we have around 50% of the students coming from the deprived sections. So that is a kind of a fair arrangement today. But I think for a better composition of the university, the composition of the faculty also required to have a better change. Implementation of reservation policy in faculty positions, SST, BC, and a kind of bigger number in administrative positions too. The social composition is of course important, but it should reflect in all other sectors of power also. That has not happened in JNU for a very long time. As I said, that the SST reservation in faculty positions is almost minimal. OBC reservation has not implemented in JNU, and there are multiple other ways to be because of which the OBC reservation is never filtered in JNU. I think on that we need to do something more, and if we do that, probably the demography of the faculty members will also change. The administrative position will also be occupied by the students, and then of course the larger correspondence with the students will also change. So that point is important.
On that note, on other disciplines besides social science, I think I totally agree, and I wanted to say that that is what has sort of because one of our former students did mention once in my house saying, "Sona ma'am, you are such a loss to our community." I said, "Why?" He said, "We've lost a social scientist." I said, "Why? What prohibits? Why shouldn't we be studying non-social science subjects?" And on a hindsight, after I got appointed as Vice Chancellor, when we did, stock taking of how many tribals, let's say, across the country, professors are eligible to be applying for a Vice Chancellor's position, we just couldn't count. Okay, so therefore, had it not been science or mathematics, computer science, and I wouldn't have been able to have this journey. That is one, and so I totally agree. Not only that, and for the other reason also, faculty appointments also with as per reservation policy have to happen. Why? Because here I did mention a very painful anecdote in a cryptic terms, but that is rampant in the university where I am in. Not only in the classroom, but even in the campus or administration, where the environment is not conducive. What education is happening? Tell me. I mean, you don't have to be seen. You can't enter the staff room. And certain sections could enter the staff room keeping the chappal outside. You see, this is the kind of space we have in. I mean, besides, if only we go back, and all of us, if we go back to the spaces we came from, we do have our horror stories, right? And for me to go and be seated in this place, in the chair of most with highest responsibility, I think one thing I needed to do, and which I did, was just bring in more teachers as giving them certain responsibilities in the administration, and otherwise there would be only students, coming in aggression to demand certain things, but then it's from these sections, and the administration otherwise, and just going loggerhead. But now that we have more teachers, the SC, ST, and OBC, all of them in the administration in statutory and non-statutory posts. First of all, I was asked this question bluntly when I appointed the first OSD. Okay, "Ma'am, this is not a statutory post." I said, "Yes." "So what is your problem?" I said, on one hand we keep saying that we are understaffed, or one person has numerous. Prior to that, only one person, because X or Y has certain surname, can be loaded with 3 responsibilities, statutory only. That is no problem. But when that one post has a lieutenant of certain other section, that is a problem. So I think therefore appointments are important, so that these spaces also would have possibilities for teachers also to take those roles, and for students to have a more conducive or congenial environment to talk, dialogue, even to demand. I mean, the rightful demands don't have to be always aggression to begin with, talking and etc. And then I think just that access at that point also is what I wanted to mention.
The question that has been asked is whether the EWS reservation nullifies the regional deprivation or the deprivation marks. First of all, we should realize, one rather take note of the fact that even before the EWS came, and it is certainly not, I'm not equating regional deprivation at par with EWS, but regional deprivation marks were provided, were assigned to all, one and all. I mean, whether you were a reserved category or a non-reserved category, if you came from an area which was which had deprivations of some kind or the other, then you were assigned a certain marks depending upon which quartile your district was located in. So this itself was a mechanism to in fact expand the intake in order to accommodate those who were not provided with any kind of reservation. At the moment when EWS has been introduced, does it mean that the strength of the deprivation marks would come down? This is a question that has to be evaluated, and I don't think any evaluation has been done. But normatively speaking, I do not see that it will diminish. It will rather add greater strength to those who are from the EWS category to outsmart others. So it may work. I mean, hypothetically, I mean, if I work it out with some kind of real statistics, but on whatever that comes to my mind, it will have the potential. Now, say for example, there is a person with 10% reservation or whatever under the EWS, also comes from a deprived area, gets a 4 marks or 2 marks, depending on whatever quartile, then the total score for this person would be higher, and would therefore have the potential to in fact have an impact on other communities. So therefore, this has to be studied, but only if the statistics are available. I have tried in the last 3 years, every year I in fact approach the admissions department of JNU to give me the statistics so that I can try with something else, which there was some ideas in my mind, so that it could be a far more widespread kind of a deprivation policy or practice. But they say that they do not collate the data on the lines that I want, because it has been privatized. They say that that agency which in fact collects the data, it doesn't collate the data on this line. I think this is where we are compromising the independence of the institution. I think these are policy matters which should be strengthened. I think if an issue is taken up in the academic council and in different school boards, this can be pushed through in order to influence the decision makers, especially at the executive committee council level, to in fact generate this kind of data, so that periodically one could perhaps take a look at as to the impact of all these reservation policies or affirmative action, besides several others that we have been talking about.
Right, so admission is a very important critical issue that we as an institution must try and reclaim in order to be able to make this university more inclusive. I think we have one round for another set of questions, and they're quite all very interesting, so I'll just quickly go through them. What is your view on the criticism that Marxist historians, including JNU historians, missed out the caste question critically? The second part of the question is, Nehruvian model is cherished for higher education institutions like IIT's JNU. Dravidian model is cherished for midday meal schemes in primary education. The question is, did Nehruvian model primarily miss out addressing the educational needs of Dalits, Adivasis, minorities, and backward class people of the country? Second one is, a lot of Dalit students, before getting hindered by the university spaces, get hindered by their own lower self-esteem and questioning of self-worth. it prevents them from stepping forward in the first place. What would you advise them? Third question is, as we all know, the sphere of academics to a great extent revolve around social capital, networking through conferences and so on. Do you think access to such social capital, the platform to make one's point heard itself, is somehow conditioned by one's caste capital? If so, how would you address it? So just a quick rapid round.
Yeah, and on the last question, the social capital, yes, it's both a kind of it can have a kind of a positive impact, but it can also be used in order to diminish the impact of the other. So social capital works on both ways. An Indian context, because the caste or maybe ethnic affiliations continue to play a very, very important role. If not within JNU, outside, to the extent that one understands the social capital could be a very, very important aspect to study and see as to how it works. And there are other questions that you had. Yes, right. Yeah, maybe.
Right. This question is, of course, I'm not a right person to answer, why? Because I'm also struggling with the same questions. For a very long time, these questions are part of our academic and social discourse for a very long now. That what the earlier academic disciplines have done to the Dalit and Adivasi questions, and how to kind of mitigate with that, and how to kind of make a better improvement in that discourse. Probably the Dalit scholarship which has emerged in probably the last 2 or 3 decades answered this particular problem in a very systematic and very intellectual manner. There is a kind of a suggestion that, of course, there are ideological and philosophical ways to deal with caste and class question, but the way Dalit also understand that it is not that you will be speaking on class, that Marxist has some kind of an authority to speak on class and other issues, and the Dalits will only speak on caste issues. That bifurcation is no more there. If you see the larger literature on Dalit issues or on tribal issues, the Dalit intellectuals are equally contributing heavily on market, on class issues, on poverty, on many other issues that are around for discussion. And therefore, this particular value, that this kind of stereotype that Dalit intellectual class is mainly about caste question, I think that's no more in the right proposition. And even equally for the Marxists, and the way the Marxist scholars have contributed on caste and tribal issues for such a long time, it has actually improvised the old debate and entered into a new discipline now. And therefore, probably more than this particular self-low esteem kind of an idea, I think JNU has provided that kind of platforms and even kind of a social and public space where the students have actually emerged as leaders and intellectuals, for that matter. JNU, apart from being known for what they called dominated by the left student activism, we also have Dalit OBC organizations that are contributing in making this space a little democratic and participatory, or even more that matter inclusive. So those discussions are going on. Of course, it's not a battle between ideas that we must understand JNU is known for, but there is a kind of a larger democratic space where the Marxist or the socialist or the others can contribute and make this a wonderful place. Equally, that space is also available for other ideas and other disciplines and other ideologies, maybe the Ambedkarites or the tribal questions or many other such questions are equally have that kind of a what called access or capacity or even capability to play an important role. And probably JNU is doing that for a very, very long time, and that is the beauty that we need to preserve and cherish further.
I think of the 4 of us sitting here, I'm one from not social science, and therefore most of all these 3 questions I think could be better answered by social science persons. But therefore, again, I'm not trying to be judgmental. This is only my guess and a very, very personal opinion that every set or generation of faculty in JNU, outside JNU, have tried to do their best. Now, one of the things is like, at certain point in time, certain frameworks have been considered as benchmark. And then, therefore, having worked on those frameworks, most of them Eurocentric frameworks, and therefore, alternates in order to accommodate even the complexity that Indian society has. I think whether those frameworks were good enough, I think that has come because of those studies have been done. So therefore, just agreeing with what again Harish mentioned on that. And so these questions will have to be dealt with, and whether until third generations come and actively start working on various comparisons worldwide, I think we'll not reach anywhere. And this academic exercise, as well as what happens at ground zero, has to also cannot be in isolation, because I think something of that we witnessed in 2009 when some of some very esteemed faculty members who had been pioneers in certain areas and had worked, and their career actually had a very nice graph. But then when it came to having an opinion on why reservations should also be in a higher cadre, I think it was sort of a surprise and baffling to us. So anyway, we are humans, all of us with folly, and we also have a time and space to learn. So therefore, I give that space to. About the self-esteem, there in my university, in Sidhu Kanu Murmu University, because the kind of composition I told you, although more than, in fact, in certain section classes or certain areas, there are 70% students who are tribals and etc. All right, but then they all suffer from this. So I think some of us who become, and some of you students who have come this way, do become an icon and inspiration. I think unless that happens, we plow back to encourage our where we come from. I think it will continue to be there. So let us do that part. And there is some good in everybody, if I love maths, that was thing. But then, everybody has some spark, even sports and extracurricular activities and etc. And that is where, again, besides education, sports and, games are another equalizer where your potential or your, that capability is what works, and you get known as a star of that game. And on the third, although I don't have the authority to say much, but I think numbers do matter. So that's where I would end.
Alright, so thank you very much to Professor Minz and Professor Wankhede and Professor Sinha for a very lively discussion and debate on the topic of access to education. And as I think the note that everyone has underlined is that all of us sort of have to struggle at different points of time and make that access and make education accessible to others as well. So thank you very much. I want to thank the audience also for being such patient listeners. And so I think we meet again at 2 o'clock for the next session. So thank you very much. Thank you.